Hey everybody, sorry I've been gone for so long. I did say I was very busy at work, and this has probably been the first time I've really been able to do anything outside of my job at the moment. So I thought I'd get on here and we go on with animations in Angular 2. So for this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create like a task list system, and basically what we'll have is a little div. It kind of looks like a poster note, and that poster note will have the task that's on it, and then once you hover over it, it'll animate a certain way, and when you hover off, it'll animate another different way, and then finally when we click on it, it'll go to like an active state, or a completed state I should say. So it'll act like, oh yeah, the task is completed by clicking on it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in this video. So before we can actually start in the animation part, we need to actually build up the UI, okay? At least to a starting state. So let's do this. So I'll come over to the code, and so far in my app component HTML, I've just created a H1 element as taskless animation, and then I've got this section. In terms of the component, there's nothing in here at the moment. It's just the default stuff with the ng on in it, and that's it. No CSS for this component specifically, and we probably won't be adding any in this lesson either. So I want to create a task or a list of tasks, and those lists of tasks will be a component themselves, alright, because we want to handle animation of each individual task. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new terminal shell here, because one I've already got open for the ng serve. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to quickly jump up into my area, so cd documents /angular 2 / I can't remember, cd states and transitions is what I've called it, and this is all in GitHub as well, so if you want to follow along you can, or you can just look at the code in the GitHub repository. Though I tend to encourage people to follow along, because if you follow along you get your hands on the code and you get a good read for how things work just a little better than what you would if you just listen, okay? So that's why I always recommend, and I go slowly in my videos so that people can try and keep up. So now I'm in states and transitions. I'm just going to quickly create a new component, so ngg component, and I'm just going to call it task. So I'm going to do its stuff. And it's gone and created the component, and it's updated the app module, so we don't have to do anything in here. It's already been added. Now we've got this task component, and this is what we're going to modify first. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to create a sample task component. Okay, so I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to create an article, because I think of it like an individual ticket, a syndicate, or a syndicated piece of information. So based on the HTML5 schematics, we should be using an article here. I'm then going to use a header like so, and inside of this header I'm going to add a H1 tag. So if you've done HTML5 before, you would know what I'm doing here. And I'm going to have something called task.name as part of the heading, and then underneath that, inside of a paragraph tag, I'm going to have task.description. Cool. Straightforward, nothing else to add there at the moment. So I'm going to go over to the component code now. We know we need a task. So first I'm going to get rid of this on in it, because we're not going to need it. So we'll just delete that. So we'll get rid of ng on in it, and we'll get rid of constructor. And basically what I'm going to use here is an input. Okay. Now I haven't included that in the core yet, but that's alright, let's do that quickly. Task, and it'll be this thing called a task. Now we haven't created this yet, and that's fine. We'll do that right now. So under the task folder, I'm going to just create a task class. And I'm going to export this task. Export class task. Spell it right down, like so. And we're going to have a name, which is string, and we'll have a description, which is also a string. And because I like to construct things using constructors, I'm going to pass in a name here and a description here. It's just so you don't forget to populate certain things sometimes. This dot name equals name. And this stuff you've seen before, that's why I'm rushing through it. And if you're following along, hopefully you've done this so many times yourself that I'm not going to get too far ahead of you. So we've got a task object, and we've assigned it to the component here. We just need to include it inside of here as an import. Task from task. Cool. And for now, that's all I'm going to do because we haven't got any tasks. So let's go and do that now. Let's go and create a task. And we're going to do it inside of the parent app component. Right? I'm going to create 2 tasks. So on init, because we already have that. And come in here. First I'm going to include the task class, import task from, and remember around the task / task. And we go var. Before I even do that, I'm going to create an array of tasks. So tasks, which is a task array. And I ing on it, I'm going to go task equals new array of task. And I should put this dot task, so I always forget to this part. That's TypeScript being very specific. And for the first one, I go this dot task dot push new task, and we'll say go shopping. Make sure you buy milk. That's the first one. And I'll copy and paste this. And a lot of this stuff I'm doing right now, you've seen this stuff before, that's why I'm not explaining it. We'll go finish animation video. Talk about triggers and states. That's essentially what this video is going to be about. So we've set up our tasks. I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to come over to the app component because we want to pass, we want to do a for each on this. So I'm going to come in here. And I'm going to reference the task control here. So we've got the task component, TS. So we need the app task component. So back to my component here. Inside the section, I'm going to paste that. I'm going to do an attribute bind to task, and I'll explain in a minute why it's just task. In fact, this attribute is also just task. And I'll just close this off for a second. Now, because I want to have multiple tasks, but I want all the mock-up for a task to be inside the task component, I'm going to do the for each, or the for loop out here. So we're going to go ng4, and we're going to let task of tasks, like so. And then basically, because we've put let task of tasks, it's going to include task here, and it's going to pass that through as an attribute binding. And then ultimately, that will come down to task component, which is input of task, because you've got many different components at this point. So the task comes through to the HTML, and we've got task.name, task.description. So hopefully now we should get just 2 lots of a name and description on the screen, probably just a simple H1 and then a paragraph one under the other. And that's what we've got here. Go shopping, make you buy milk, finish animation video, talk about triggers and states. Now it doesn't really look like a task or a ticket at this point. So this is where we're going to start adding some CSS to this. So let's do that. So we come over to the CSS, and we're going to add a few things here. Firstly, because I'm using article, I'm going to not make this a block element. Okay, so at the moment it's a block element, but I'm going to make it an inline block. So that means we can have them side by side. That's the first part. I want to specify a width and a height of this to be 200 pixels. I'm going to have, we'll set the text centered. Otherwise it looks weird when it's inside of a block. The background color, I'm not going to specify at this stage, or the color of the text. We're going to do that as part of the animation. So the other things I'm not going to look at here is providing a little bit of margin to the left. So it'll be off to the left hand side. I'm going to give that about 30 pixels. So it'll add some spacing between the tickets, or whatever it is, the task tickets, and also to the edge. And I want to add a border radius, even though at this point we don't have any borders. We will add it in the animation later. And the last thing, which I'm not going to explain what this is in terms of the syntax, we're going to add a box shadow here. So 2 pixel RGBA. So we're going to add a little bit of alpha to this. We'll make it black, and it'll be 0. Let's say 2. And then we'll have 0, 0, 2 pixels, and RGBA. And if you guys want to know what this is, I'm happy for you to go look it up, because it's going to take way too much time for me to explain it at this point. So that's that. And the last thing I want to do with the article is when I put my hand over it or I hover over it, I want to have the cursor be a pointer or a little hand. Right. Now I'm just worrying about Chrome at this point. I'm not trying to cross browser it. You guys are happy to change it however you want. So this is what we get. Okay, so you can kind of see there's a little bit of shadowing, so you can kind of see which each ticket starts and ends, and that's all there is to it at this point. There's no colors, there's no updating of anything, right? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to control the behavior of these things with different states and this concept of a trigger. Okay, so what is a trigger? Well, essentially a trigger is that we're going to define a set of rules or a set of different states that can happen based on trigger when you change the value of a specific property in your component. The best way to explain this is to demonstrate it. Okay, it's not the easiest thing to explain in words. It's definitely easier to demonstrate. So we'll come over to the component, and we need to include a few things. At the moment, we've just got component and input. In Angular Core, there's also something called a trigger. Alright, and this is what we're going to be using to define what's going to cause or how to apply this trigger to a certain element. We're going to use this trigger interface or trigger class, and then we need a state. Alright, so we need that. And we also need a method called style, which will tell us what styles we're going to have for each state that's part of a trigger. And then finally, and I might leave the rest for the moment, this is all we need for the first step. Okay, we will get into transitions, but we'll cover this first. So how do we apply animations in Angular 2? Alright, it's actually done in the component decorator, and it's done simply by going animations. Alright, now this animations takes an array of different scenarios that make animations happen. One of the main scenarios that you'll see is something called a trigger, like so. Alright, this trigger takes in an input that's a string, and then it takes an array of states. Now the input that's string will be something that you'll apply to each individual card, right? And I'll show you in a second how to do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it task status. Okay? Now it's very important what you name this thing, because it's going to be something that's down here. So for example, I'm now going to create a new variable on the component called task status, and we're going to call it string. Okay, I'm not going to explain at this point what the default is, but we will give it a default in a few minutes. So we need to apply this trigger to one of our elements to say, hey, what we're about to apply in terms of states inside of this trigger, we're going to apply to this specific element. So how do we do this? All right, we come over to our component and we want to apply something here to the article. All right, we're going to change the state on the article when we do something. So to do this, you do what's referred to as a attribute binding. However, it's a special kind that starts with an @ symbol, and then the name is the name you put inside of your animation. Alright, so that matches to this name here. Now these names happen to be the same, but they don't necessarily have to be the same, because what happens next is what this is equal to is to a property in your component. And can you tell which property in the component I'm going to be mapping it to? You guessed it, task status. And that's where I said they don't have to be the same. Okay, so now we're saying on this trigger, or whenever this changes, look for a state that will be on this trigger. Again, it's probably still a little too confusing at this stage. I'll show you step by step as we go along. But now that we have this mapping to a trigger, we've got this task status trigger, it's mapped to the right element, we need to provide a set of states that this trigger can be triggered into. Okay, it's kind of like, you know, you can have an active state, then you can be in active state, or you can be somewhere in the middle, or somewhere. You can have multiple different states, right? They're all sitting under this one trigger scheme. So the next thing we do is we define each state. How do we define a state? Well, we use the word state, right? And this happens to be a function. And inside of here, the first parameter we're going to give is the name of one of the states, which for me, I'm going to call highlighted, okay? Because I'm going to change the state of the article to a highlighted state in a particular situation, which I have yet to define. So the next thing we do is we apply what's referred to as styles, or some kind of animation behavior, and that's where this style function comes in. Okay, so this also takes in an object like so. So how we work from here is we start writing some CSS rules, right? Just like you're writing CSS3, you write them in here inside of this style object. So the first one I might want to apply is a background. In fact, you don't need the quotes for the property name. You do potentially need them for the value. So background, and we go hash. We're going to go 33A in this circumstance. These are just numbers I've predetermined ahead of time, so I'm not just making this up, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave that there for the moment. The other thing I might do, I might add the color of white, just to give a bit of a distinction, right? If I save this now, and I come down to this task status, and I set this to highlighted, what do you think is going to happen? If I go over to the code now, you're probably going to see that because I set this task status to highlighted, you would assume that both tickets are now going to be of a background color of that and the color of white. And there you go. Okay, so whatever this is, if I change this to something it's not as one of the active states, it won't apply anything. It'll just go back to the normal colors it was. Right? As soon as I give it the name of one of the states that's here, it's going to apply those CSS rules. So that's one state though. Obviously, for animation to work, we want to apply multiple states. So what do? Well, because this is an array, we just add another one. Alright, So state, I think I called this one unhighlighted. Right. Once again, we're applying a style. This style is an object, and the background for this we're going to set to a darker color. So hash, and we'll go 127. All right, so it's going to be a dark blue, really pale color, and we're going to set the color to, let's go a weird colory gray for this. All right. So if I save this now, what do you think is going to happen? It's still going to be blue, isn't it? All right. However, if I now take this state and I put that down here in the task status, keeping in mind and remembering very much that if we change the task status to the value, it gets mapped through, and we save it, we should now get a background with this color and a color of text of this color. And there you go. All right. But so far, we haven't really provided any animations. We've just set states on things. And we have to manually set this in order to really do anything. And that's true. We do. Okay, but this trigger is meant for you to wire up the changes on this property. Okay, so this is saying when this changes to either this or this, we're gonna provide some animation that will switch to these colors. Okay, same as this one here, and it will do a slight little animation between, and we can control the duration of that animation as well. But I'm going to show that later on in the video. So, the next thing I want to do is I want to provide an activated state, because what I want to do eventually is when I click on something, I want it to be in an activated color. So style, once again, like that. We're going to set the background to a greenish color. So we're going to go hash 2b3 and color, I think it was also white. Yes, color is also white. Right. Whoops, don't need that semicolon. And I just want to quickly confirm that that is exactly what I was expecting, so I'll set the task status to activated. And it's taking a little bit to load, but there it goes. Okay, so that's the kind of behavior we want in terms of colors. If we click on it, or if we unclick, it's going to undo that state. We haven't got to the point of actually triggering these states yet. We're just changing the property on the fly just to confirm that each state is doing what we intend it to. So, the next step is, how do we make it do it, or change different states based on different actions? Well, it's pretty straightforward, really. If you think about, basic DOM events, that's essentially what you're doing here. Now, firstly, I'm going to set the default state to unhighlighted, because when I first come to the page, I want it to look like this. Okay, and when I hover over it, so when I hover over this, I want this to highlight in the highlighted state. And when I hover away, I want it to go back to this state. When I click on it, I want it to go green with the white. And if I click it again, it'll go to a highlighted state. And then when I hover away, it'll go to this state again. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do next. So this is very, 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 very easy. So easy that it's just a matter of creating some event bindings here. So we go, for example, mouse over. Whoops, spell it right. Mouse over. We're going to create a method. Yeah. What do you think we're going to put in the method? I'm just going to put toggle status, and we'll set it to true. Well, no, sorry, I'm going to call it toggle highlighted. I'm going to set the true. We're going to put a mouse out, and I'm going to also call toggle highlighted, except I'm going to set it to false. So let's handle these two situations. So first I have to come back to my task component, and I'm going to create a function, and it's going to have a is highlighted, because that's essentially what we're passing, which is a bool, and then, oh, sorry, not a bool, a boolean. I keep forgetting I'm in TypeScript here, not C#. So now that we're here, all we need to do is change the task status based on what is set here. So we can go this dot task status is equal to if is highlighted, right? Well, we're going to set it to highlighted, right? Else, it's going to be unhighlighted. Let me save that. Pretty straightforward. Come over, hover over. There's your highlight state. Hover away. So there's a little bit of animation there, right there. You know. Now the real power, and this is what I'm going to show next, is what if I want to slightly rotate this a little bit to prop up a little bit when I hover over it, and then come back down when I'm not on it anymore. So think of a slight little rotation. How do we do that? It's simple CSS, right? Anyone looked at CSS3 transitions and rotations and all that stuff before? Well, it all applies here as well. It's the same thing. So I can come up to the highlighted, I can create a new property here, I can go transform, and we can go rotate. And this is all CSS3 stuff, so I shouldn't have to explain this. You can look this up yourself. And I'm going to move it -5 degrees, okay? And then, when I'm going back to unhighlighted, I'm going to put it back where it was, which, by default, is 0 degrees. So what will this look like? Let's take a look. You get that little turn, you know, to indicate, hey, look, this is the one I'm currently touching. You can do some really funky stuff just with a little bit of transitioning, a little bit of state changes. Now, I haven't looked at transitions yet. This is just literally changing states on the fly. Right? As we hover, it's just applying new CSS rules. So you don't get to see that quick or that smooth animation yet, which we'll show soon because it's easy to do. So now I've done that, the last thing I might apply is let's add a border to this thing. Alright, so we'll go border, and I'm going to go 3 pixel solid, and we'll go a blue color. Let's go hash 006. And for unhighlighted, we're not going to have a border, but let's say for the activated, we'll add a little bit of transform, and we'll rotate it slightly more than what we do when we hover over it. We'll make it 10 degrees? No, we'll make it 8 degrees. Right, so just a little bit more over than normal, and then we'll apply a border of 3 pixel solid, and we'll go very green color, hash 060. So it's very similar to the blue here. So let's quickly just look at this. So we've got our states right. So again, we haven't quite gotten to the point of triggering an active state yet, but we're going to do that right now. So in order to trigger an active state, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a boolean down here to be called is checked, and I'm going to make it a boolean, and the default value is false. Okay. Now I want the highlighted and the unhighlighted to toggle only when is checked is set to false, because if it's checked, I don't want the task status updating. I want it to stay whatever the activated state is going to be until I change it otherwise. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to come to toggle highlight, and I'm going to go if this dot is checked. So if it's not checked, then we can continue to toggle, okay? We're not going to change the status of what the thing looks like if it's checked. Now we need to write a method for actually when we click the button on the actual article, right, for the actual task itself. So let's do that. So you guessed it, another event here, and just click, okay? And I'm going to go toggle active state, and that's all I'm going to do here is just have a parameterless function. And so I'm going to grab this and go back over to my component. I'm going to come here, and the first thing I'm going to do is go this dot is checked equals not this dot is checked, right? And then I'll go if this dot is checked, right? Or sorry, if it's not checked anymore, what I want it to do. Oh no, if it is checked, actually, let's do the positive case first. So if it is checked, and in fact I will do this in one line rather than over multiple lines. I'll do it like I did above. So I can go this dot task status equals this dot is checked, then it's going to be activated. Otherwise, it's going to be highlighted, because most likely our cursor is still going to be over the box when it happens, and that should do it. So run this, and we can get the hover. If I click on something, whoa, there it is, it goes green. If I hover away, it stays green. I can click this one, it stays green. If I hover over it, I hover out of it, it stays green. As soon as I click off it, it goes back to an active state, and then when I hover away, it goes to the blue state, and then back on, off and on, and you guessed it, yeah. So that's how we can toggle different states in different ways based on events. Now the last thing I wanted to show very quickly, and there's going to be a more advanced video on this specific topic, because this is just a very simple transition I'm going to show, but it is a transition. Okay, so for triggers, we've specified multiple states. Okay, what you can also specify for a trigger is multiple transitions. How to get from one state to the other, what happens when that happens. For example, if I want to go from a highlighted state to an unhighlighted state, what does that do for us? Or if I want to go from an unhighlighted state to a highlighted state, what kind of animation, how long does it last, that kind of stuff. We can do that right now. Right? So for the trigger, underneath the state, we can go to the next line, and we can now specify this thing called a transition. Now I haven't included that up here yet. I'm going to do that right now. Right, transition. And what this takes is a string, but the string has to be in a specific way. So how it works is whatever state you want the transition to start in. So just say you're in an unhighlighted state, and your transition, or the next state you're going to is a highlighted state. Then you start off with the unhighlighted state, right? And you're saying when it goes to, so that little arrow there, when it goes to a highlighted state, like so, right, we're going to do something. And what we're going to do is something called animate. Now this is another function that needs to be included up here, so animate, and that's the last one we have to concern ourselves with. Now what does animate do? Well, essentially all it does is allow us to specify duration and what's referred to as an easing. Now I'm going to talk more about easing in the next video, because I'd like to describe all the different easings there are. They're all very different, and they all handle how transitions work differently. But for this video, I'm just going to add a duration of the animation between highlighted and unhighlighted and highlighted to 150 milliseconds, and I'm going to do what's called ease in. And you'll kind of get an understanding of what it kind of does when I run it. The other transition I'm going to do quickly in this video is I'm going to go from highlighted to unhighlighted. So this is the hover in, hover out scenarios. I'm not going to handle activated in this one just because it's a simple mouse click. So for this one, instead of ease in, I'm going to say ease out. So what I'm saying is, when we toggle the state from unhighlighted to highlighted, we're going to animate over the course of 150 milliseconds so the changes to these properties. So we're going to slowly go from a background color of #127 to a background color of #33A, right, over the course of 150 milliseconds. The color of #888 will slowly become white over the course of 100 milliseconds. The transform of no rotation to a rotation of -5 degrees will happen over 100 milliseconds with an ease-in ease-in option. And the border is the same, right? We're going to add a border over the course of 150 milliseconds. And then the reverse happens, okay? So we lose the border, we rotate back to normal, we change the color back to #888, and the background goes back to #127. And it all happens over the course of 150 milliseconds. So it's not instantaneous, it takes a little bit of time to get there. So let's see what that looks like. So here we go, I'm going to hover over, and you can see there's a slight bit of animation. It takes a little bit longer, it looks a little bit smoother than before, where it kind of just, went from one state and then kind of clicked into the next state. This one kind of slowly gets there. And for it to really stand out, you probably need to make this about 500 milliseconds. But once you do this, it starts to look a little silly, okay? Because it's too long, obviously. So we'll come back over. And if I let it go for half a second, see how slow it goes? And then you hover back. It kind of loses its, superpower by going super slow. So that's why I put it at 150 milliseconds. And if I click, that's instantaneous from that state to that state. There's no animation there or transition. But as soon as I hover away, it slowly transitions back to its state. Now the other way to maybe indicate this a better way is to rotate it more. So we'll put this back to 150 and 150. And we'll change the rotation to 15 degrees. Okay? And we'll come over, and you'll see it does a little bit more rotation, and it looks a little bit more animated. But I don't like the fact that it rotates so much. I think that's not really a standout type of thing. So I'll put it back to -5. And that's it pretty much for this video. So the next video we're going to focus more on this transition stuff. There's multiple different ways of handling transition in Angular 2. Especially when we talk about screens coming in and screens going out, and toggling from a default state to an active state, or toggling from a starting state to an end state, and so on and so forth. But we'll see that in the next video. So thank you everybody for listening, and I'll catch you then. Bye for now.